My upcoming indie game, Celestial Golf, is all about orbital mechanics. The golf is just a metaphor for being able to very quickly get into interacting with orbits, changing the ball's trajectory on a huge scale across the solar system. In order to make it possible for users to intuitively understand how orbits work and how hitting the ball will change the trajectory, the most important piece of user interface in the game is the trajectory lines. So this devlog is going to be about how I calculate those orbital trajectories and the thought process behind the design of how the ball actually moves through space. So the first and most obvious way that we can have a ball moving through space is to use Newton's famous equation of gravitational motion. It's a very simple equation. Acceleration equals g, which is an arbitrary constant throughout the universe, times the mass of the planet you're orbiting, such as Earth, divided by r squared, where r is the distance of the ball from that planet. So this is all you need to be able to calculate the acceleration due to gravity on any object in the universe floating through space. And to make it work in a game context, all we have to do is apply that formula for every body, for every celestial body in the solar system, every frame. And of course, acceleration acts as a vector, so it is drawing the ball in towards the planet. So here is a very early prototype of celestial golf. All we have is the Earth, the Moon, and the ball. You can hit the ball with a power and angle of your choice, and you can see that the ball does exhibit the orbital properties that you would expect. All that this means is that the ball is being pulled in towards the body, the Earth, and also the further away it is, the less the effect of gravity. The problem is that it's very hard to play this game because you have no idea where the ball's going to go. If you're about to hit the ball, you kind of don't know if you're going to hit it too far and it's going to fly off into space, or not far enough and it's going to just come bouncing back down. It doesn't really give you an intuitive understanding of how orbits work. So what we need to do is display the trajectory of the ball in advance. And that's the hard part. So the first and most obvious way to draw a trajectory is to simply simulate the path of the ball faster than real time. So that's what I do in the second prototype here. You can see that now we have these blue lines showing the predicted path of the ball. And the way this works is it's actually fairly simple. We just run that simulation, that same Newton acceleration due to gravity. We run it thousands of times in one frame. So we can compute like 1,000 new positions for the ball in one frame and draw those as a line. We can't do this forever into the future because of time constraints, but then the next frame, we pause that, and then the next frame, we do another 1,000 and we update the line again. So pretty quickly, you see this line draws itself, showing you the future trajectory of the ball, and then you can just sit back and watch the ball largely follow that line. So now in the new prototype with the trajectory lines, it's actually a lot easier to get the ball into a stable orbit, or a semi-stable orbit, as we'll see, because we're able to see if we're in an orbit, and we can adjust the apoapsis and adjust the periapsis, and you can kind of get an intuitive feeling for where the ball's going to go. We also have this green line, which is the planned trajectory, and that follows the same principle. So this is all pretty easy to do, but we run into a couple of problems pretty quickly. The first problem is it's slow. This is all done with GD script in Godot, so I'm sure that I could probably optimize this, but ultimately it doesn't matter how optimal it is, there is going to be some limit to how fast we can draw those trajectories into the future. It's not a big problem for going around Earth and Moon, where it's a pretty small time scale. But once we get up to the whole solar system, we're talking about a year of simulated time to go all the way around the sun. And the player is able to speed up the game time to, say, 1000x. But then that means that our trajectory predictor, which was already running at 1000x, is now running in real time. It's not able to be significantly faster than the actual game speed. So then you start to have this problem where you see the trajectory predictor is barely able to keep up with the game speed. So you have to pause the game and wait for the trajectory to slowly draw all the way around the sun. We can get around that by simply increasing the time step of each tick of the simulation. So instead of doing a time tick every simulated day, we can do a time tick every 2 days or every 10 days. That means that the line draws much faster, but the longer the time gap in between each tick, the more rounding errors we will introduce, and those accumulate very quickly over time. So you end up with a situation where the trajectory is slightly off, and then it's more off, and it gets worse and worse, and once you're gone all the way around the sun, the trajectory doesn't actually match the position of the ball. It's just deviating outwards from the trajectory, and that's not very useful at all. The third problem is that because of those rounding errors, the trajectories don't necessarily meet up back around at the start. So once you go all the way around the circle, you end up in a different place to where you started. That's due to rounding errors, and it's also due to tidal forces, which basically the moon is affecting the trajectory of the ball as it goes around the Earth. So it's not a perfect ellipse. Now, this is a realistic phenomenon, but it's also kind of annoying because you can see in this clip here, the ball is wiggling around all over the place, and after a couple of times around the Earth, it's just flung off into space. So those tidal forces, while realistic, they're actually exaggerated versus the real world because the scale is smaller than the real world. But also, it's not very fun when you're trying to be thinking about orbital mechanics to have your orbits be wobbling around all over the place. So that's actually, even though it's realistic, it's something that we actually want to avoid. So the solution to this is to get away from using a simulation model and switch into an analytical model. We have a way of mathematically describing an orbit. It was invented or discovered, I suppose, by Johannes Kepler in 1609. And what always blows my mind is that Kepler discovered the mathematical laws that govern the motion of the planets before Newton discovered the gravitational equation that I mentioned earlier. So Kepler knew how the planets were moving, but he couldn't explain why until Newton came along. I find that so fascinating. The Kepler equations describe an orbit as an ellipse or as other conic sections. You basically describe an orbit with 6 variables that control how eccentric it is, how far away it is from the body, and so on. And you just describe the orbit mathematically. And I'm not going to go into those equations here, but what's useful about this model is that you aren't going to be doing a time step where at every point in time, the new position is calculated based on the previous position. So errors can accumulate. Instead, we're able to say, tell me the exact position and velocity of the ball at time t. So at any time in the simulation, you can just run the algorithm and it will tell you where will the ball be. So you can ask for a day in advance or 100 years in advance and with the same accuracy. The downside of the Kepler model is it only works with 2 bodies. So ball, Earth, or ball and moon. You can't calculate analytically the orbit of an object with that is influenced by more than 2 other bodies. So the Earth and the moon together. It's the 3-body problem, which can't be expressed analytically. We have to simplify the actual game model so that the ball is only influenced by one body at a time. So this is the sphere of influence model. Essentially, we calculate what is the body that the ball is most gravitationally influenced by. If it's close to the Earth, then it's the Earth. The ball moves closer to the moon, then it's more gravitationally influenced by the moon now than it is by the Earth, so it's in the moon's sphere of influence. You need to do this anyway in terms of the user interface, because whichever body the ball is closest to, that's the body that we will use as a reference frame for the trajectory. That's a whole separate topic. So we simply extend that and say, right, the ball will only be gravitationally affected by that body and not by anything else. So this isn't just changing the implementation, it's changing the whole physics model of the game to be much simpler. But I think it's an improvement, because even though, sure, you don't get to experience that weird wobbly tidal effects, for the most part, that is just an annoyance, and it's better for the user to just be able to think about orbits as nice, clean ellipses that they can manipulate by hitting the ball at certain times. And that's, I believe, how real spaceflight works. You think about your orbits as ellipses, and then you deal with tidal forces by, doing small maneuvers to fix your trajectory. So we're just cutting out that part. There's no tidal forces. You're just in a nice elliptical orbit. And another advantage of using an analytical model is that we can get data out of it to show to the user. Useful metrics like where is your apoapsis and your periapsis. So in the new build of the game, we actually show that both as a number in the UI and also on the trajectory itself. So right now, we're showing trajectories using the Kepler model, but the actual position of the ball is still based on a time-step physics computation, basically because we want to be able to bounce around the mountains and so on the planets. So that means the ball will still deviate from the trajectory because the trajectory is perfect, but the ball is calculated with accumulated rounding errors. So the plan for the future is to have the ball, when it's far away from the planets, it actually gets locked onto the trajectory. So the trajectory is no longer just a prediction, it's actually the official source of truth of where the ball's going to be. And the great thing about that is that you can speed up time as much as you want. You can go to 100,000x and the ball will always be at the correct position. It won't just get flung off into space because of rounding errors. So that's how trajectories work in Celestial Golf. I'm really excited to be able to share this with you, and if you aren't that familiar with how orbits work, this game is going to be a fantastic teaching opportunity. It teaches you space flight without having to deal with rockets and aerodynamics and fuel and all that stuff. It's just a simple two-dimensional field where you can muck around with orbits as much as you like in order to get your ball from one planet to another. If you'd like to follow along with the development, you can wishlist the game on Steam and subscribe to this channel for more devlogs in the future. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.